Now, today marks the first 100 days of Sir Keir Starmer's government. Could they have done any worse? Remember this?
You have given us a clear mandate, and we will use it to deliver change, to restore service and respect to politics, end the era of noisy performance, tread more lightly on your lives, and unite our country.
Listen, I'm struggling to keep this just to a few minutes, but I'll give it a go. In no particular order, some highlights. Now, it started with riots, which is just a fact. People were jailed for hurty words and prisons were emptied early of some pretty unsavoury characters to make room. But guess what? Many of those unsavoury characters are already back behind bars. So what was the point? We've endured Freebiegate, Sir Keir Starmer accepting money for clothes, £16,000 of which he declared as money for his private office, and gifts. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, all on the Lord Ali gravy train. A load of the front bench Labour MPs, including Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, have also accepted Taylor Swift tickets. Then Taylor gets a police escort with the level of protection only given to working royals but denied to Prince Harry. We've had a host of unworkable policies like Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's carbon capture as the party brag about closing the last of the coal mines, so we'll be reliant on China for virgin steel. It's absurd. They've even changed the planning laws so they can bulldoze through rural areas to erect unsightly pylons, which will no doubt be built using imported steel so we can offset our carbon. All of this will make our bills hideously expensive. We've had the Renters Reform Bill, which is aimed at cracking down on rogue landlords. Yet the biggest landlord in the Commons, Labour MP for Ilford South, Jazz Athwell, is one of the biggest rogue landlords of them all. Yet he remains unpunished, despite the fact that his properties were mould and ant-infested, and whilst head of the council before winning his seat, he set up a licensing scheme which he himself fell foul of. All of this whilst introducing policies that they never mentioned in their manifesto, like removing the winter fuel allowance from pensioners, which, by their own analysis before they were in government, suggested that up to 4,000 pensioners would die as a result. And they are turning Britain into a country where investors are running for the hills. Yesterday, we learned that the loose lips of our new Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, may cost the UK a £1 billion project. She made these comments on ITV.
They're a rogue operator. We're cracking down on the way that they've treated employees, and we want to see them mirror the standards of other operators that come in and out of Great Britain's waters.
Would you travel with P&O ferries?
No, I've been boycotting P&O ferries for 2.5 years, and I'd encourage consumers to do the same.
Sultan Ahmed bin Suleiman, the DP world boss who owns P&O, was apparently not going to attend the investment summit on Monday after her comments, and Angela Rayner as well had echoed similar sentiments. DP World's initial withdrawal came hours after it emerged that Qatar was selling a $306 million stake in Sainsbury's, a week after the supermarket's chief executive warned that budgets and the uncertainty was affecting sales. Well, of course it would. So on TV, Louise, who referred to the ferry firm as a rogue operator that needed cracking down on, claiming she'd boycotted them for 2 years and would encourage others to do the same, were completely naive. What an idiot. Surprise, surprise, they may well pull out even now. Number 10 are also distancing themselves from Louise, I think, to protect Angela Rayner, who echoed a similar sentiment. And if they're not tampering with things that are working, like picking on education or giving away British territory for no good reason, they're coming up with costly policies like carbon capture that have failed elsewhere. And don't get me started on the boats. Anas Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, conceded this week that Sir Keir Starmer's government had, I say in speech marks, suffered teething problems. Despite the gloomy rhetoric, Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7, low inflation and falling interest rates. To put it mildly, their first 100 days, irrespective of where you stand politically, have been a disaster for this country. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. Let me sum it up. Incompetent amateurs who are smashing this country to smithereens. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. So Keir Starmer is marking his first 100 days in office when his press spokesperson was asked ahead of the big day if the Prime Minister thought it had been a successful start. He simply said it's up to the public to decide. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, will Labour's policies wipe out the rental sector? Landlords' profits have collapsed in the past decade. Of course, you can't blame that on Labour, but following an onslaught of taxes and red tape. Then, for the Pulse, I'll be joined by medical expert and author Dr. René Honderkamp. Are we using our phones too much, causing a sleep crisis and worrying health changes in children? We'll be getting to the bottom of this. All of that coming up. Send me your thoughts, post your comments, gbnews.com/your say. I'm joined now by Peter Edwards, former editor of the Labour List. Peter, was I being completely unfair and over the top?
Well, I don't think I could accuse you of being over the top, because that may be your métier, and I'd probably say that every time you invite me on. But I wasn't clear if you were saying Labour have done nothing or they've delivered policies that they're elected on that you happen to disagree with, because they're two very different things. You, for example, may be an opponent of their policies on the environment, on setting up GBNews, which they've set in train, on carbon capture and storage. You may think that's all, so to speak, a load of hot air. But if they campaigned on that and won on that, then there's a mandate to deliver it.
Well, no, I'm not. I didn't say that at all. I'm just saying that I had 2 points of view, actually, and one of them were that they also delivered policies that they didn't mention, like the winter fuel allowance, and then, of course, the other policies that they're delivering, which I'm not impressed with in their delivery at all. And I think it's very concerning, actually, some of them.
Well, it's interesting to say that, because lots of these things do go back to the budget, and what we've had is an election in July and a budget coming right at the end of October around Halloween. And I think anyone, whether you're a staunch defender like me or otherwise, would say the communications around that could have been a bit better. Remember, in 2010, there was a change of government. Tories came in with the Lib Dems, and the George Osborne quote-unquote austerity budget was in a matter of weeks. This time, there was a headline announcement about scrapping the winter fuel allowance for some people, but the detail and, you know, all the technicalities around the taper rate that are not very exciting, I won't go in now, but the detail comes about 3 months later, and that's created a huge vacuum. So there has been a bit of a comms deficit there.
So, you know, and what about the things like, for example, Sue Gray? Now, I didn't mention her in my monologue. We've talked a lot about her anyway. But what's going on there? Nations and regions, she's supposed to be in charge of that, yet they had the big meeting and she wasn't there.
Well, she's left, I think, is a short answer.
You think she's left?
We've all
she's
been...
definitely left.
Well, and I don't claim to have inside knowledge, but the point is she had the role as Prime Minister's Chief of Staff to one of the most senior appointees in the country, and she's left that role. Now, remember, she had a senior role in Partygate when she was a civil servant, then she was in Labour in the short campaign. When anyone who's done a stressful job or a series of stressful jobs changes... they tend to have a few weeks off. And I've done that as well. I've been a chief executive somewhere and then had a breather and then done another role. But yeah, so she was on holiday when the first meeting of her new role, Nations and Regions Coordinator, took place this week. But the bottom line is that she's left the role of Chief of Staff. What I'd also say is I don't think people will ever vote on who the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff are. In nearly 20 years campaigning for Labour, it has never come up on the doorstep.
I think that people have awoken politically, actually, because I think many years ago people weren't really that engaged in politics as they are now. I think that the landscape has changed, and I also think there's less of a sort of a you know, your family voted Labour, so now you're going to vote Labour. There doesn't seem to be that anymore. People are now literally voting with their feet. And actually, within the party itself, some of the people within the party are actually complaining about their policies too, like the unions complaining about the winter fuel allowance, unions complaining about the VAT on private schools. I mean, even within their own party, there seems to be a lot of resistance.
Well, a Labour government being criticised by the trade unions, I think, has happened for time immemorial, and 'twas ever thus, just like Conservative governments tend to be criticised by the right, and eventually the right splintered and reform came out of it. So, I mean, Tony Blair actually picked fights with the Labour left and trade unions to make a point to the wider public to say, I'm governing for all of you rather than one faction. I'm in a trade union, I'm very proud to be in a trade union, but it doesn't mean I agree with everything that Unite the Union calls for.
Yeah, because even the lady who's in charge, or head of Unite Union, was complaining about the winter fuel.
Well, she's not a fan, and I enjoy being in Unite, and I can see the benefits. But I think Sharon Graham said two things. When she was elected, she said, I'm not going to be meddling in the Labour Party every day. She was very clear about that. She wanted to focus on industrial rights and get back to what she perceived as a JD. That was a big contrast to her predecessor, Lemma McCluskey, who always had something to say about the Labour Party. And then separately, as you alluded to, she's begun to criticise some of the budget measures. But what I'd say is we are in the midst of a manufacturing revolution around, green energy. And again, you can disagree with that or not, but I think there'll be a lot more for trade unionists and the manufacturing industry come the budget.
Well, why didn't they have that ready? It's all very well decimating some industries, but you need something in its place immediately.
Well, Labour aren't decimating. Coal mines have been disappearing for half a century.
That may be the case, but then the final deconstruction will be blamed on them because they were the final arbiters of it. So the deconstruction of the coaling industry and then not having anything in its place really to replace it immediately, and then also not having the facility to create your own virgin steel now. So you're now going to have to import steel from China. So now you've changed masters. You're no longer relying on oil or whatever it is from Russia or wherever, even though we still do use Russian oil and gas. But you're no longer doing that. You're now beholden to China for steel. How are we going to make steel to build the pylons, to do all this wonderful thing?
Well, carbon capture and storage, one of the points you laid out, I think that was actually set up by the last Labour government. When I was a younger reporter on the Yorkshire Post, that industry was growing quite quickly. So carbon capture and storage...
Yeah, it's already failed, though.
It's been around for 10 to 15 years.
It has, but it was unsuccessful.
Steel's a different matter because, very sadly, because it's part of our culture, the steel industry has been in strategic decline in Britain for 10 or 20 years. And I don't know enough to opine on the quality, but China are producing it cheaper, and that's a problem for the manufacturing industry.
Well, we used to put tariffs on them, didn't we, so that we would try and use our own steel. So we tried to fudge the markets in a way, but to keep our own industries afloat. But the issue that I really have here is if you're supposedly doing something for the environment, but the actual thing that you're doing to replace this is worse for the environment, just so you can offset your carbon, so the carbon is produced elsewhere, this is not... This is counterproductive.
Which bit are you saying is worse?
Well, I'm talking about steel, aren't I? So producing steel, in order to create virgin steel, which is the strongest type of steel, you need coal, OK? So China obviously have lots of coal fields and coal mines, and so we will be buying steel from China. The carbon that is used to make that steel will be offset on China's numbers, so then we'll now import that steel to the UK, and hey-ho, we haven't given away any carbon. See, this is my issue with it. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, there's a broader question that I'm probably the worst qualified to talk about, which is how much we outsource emissions. If we make something, and we used to call them widgets, but if we stop making widgets and then buy widgets from another country, are the same amount of emissions being produced in a different part of the globe, and it all goes up in the same ether? You probably need someone with a PhD to answer that.
Well, it's worse, because you're creating it, then you're transporting it from one place, China, to the UK, so there's carbon emitted doing the transportation. So even if they both gave out the same amount of carbon, the one of them requires you to then import it, and that will require... You can do your eyes like that, Peter.
Pulling my funny face.
Do your funny face, Peter, but this is the fact. Listen, Peter Edwards, I could talk to you.
There's a £1 billion industry around mitigations as well, on carbon offsetting. Whole companies have sprung up around that.
Well, we'll probably be losing $1 billion. Thank you to Louise Haigh. Thank you very much, Peter Edwards. Really good to talk to you. Right, well, let's speak to GBNews' political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Olivia, so let's talk Keir Starmer's first 100 days. Where are we with this? What are people saying?
Well, it's been a pretty tumultuous first 100 days by any standards. Some of the problems that the Prime Minister has faced have really not been of his own making. Labour couldn't really have done anything about it. The riots, for instance, which took place in the summer just after he was elected. Sorry. And polls suggest that he dealt with that in a way that was pretty popular, whether or not our viewers agree. There have been some problems, though, which arguably are of Labour's making, or at least Keir Starmer did nothing to rectify the issues quickly. For example, of course, the freebies scandal, whereby Keir Starmer and other members of the government received tens of thousands of pounds in freebies from Lord Ali. That left them open to accusations of hypocrisy, champagne socialism, etc. And the problem for the Prime Minister is that row rumbled on and on. One possible reason for that is that Sue Gray was the Chief of Staff in Downing Street. If you speak to people in Whitehall, if you speak to backbench MPs, they say that Sue Gray simply didn't have the political nous needed to do that job. And that's why something like the freebie scandal was allowed to go on for so many weeks. She has now been removed from Number 10. She's been replaced with Morgan McSweeney, who led Labour's very successful, obviously, general election campaign. Keir Starmer is suggesting in the video that he released on social media to mark this 100 days that he's resetting from today, and there will be a new tone for the government going forwards. But you don't really want to be needing to have a reset just 3 months in. As for his own personal popularity ratings, they have tumbled since he became Prime Minister and are now on a par with Rishi Sunak, leader of the opposition. That's pretty extraordinary where you consider where we were just 4 months ago.
All right, thank you. The brilliant Olivia Utley there.